My name is Jeff Eisenach. I'm a visiting scholar at AEI, where I've led our efforts over the past couple of years looking at global internet strategy issues, including cybersecurity, and that's the topic of our session here today. It's a special day for the American Enterprise Institute. This is the first public event in our new building here at 1789 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest in Washington. It's been long in the making. I was first working at the American Enterprise Institute in 1979 in a building at 1150 17th Street Northwest, which we just departed earlier this month. So it's a very special day for all of us. It's a beautiful conference facility, and this will be the first of many important events, but we're particularly happy to have today's event. And that is to focus on a topic of what should be tremendous concern, and I think is of tremendous concern to everyone in the United States, and that is cybersecurity and our ability to have and use data in an online environment and to do so securely in a way that doesn't threaten our national security. One of the worst cybersecurity breaches in America's history, at least of the ones we know of, occurred in 2014 and 15. And that was an incursion by parties. Perhaps the chairman will enlighten us on who we think exactly those parties were, but parties who succeeded in exfiltrating tens of millions of very sensitive personnel files from the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. And today we're here to learn about a report that's just been completed by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform on what went down. The report is a couple hundred pages long, and I haven't read every word of it, but I've read enough of it to tell you that it is a page-turner and very much worthy of your attention. We're going to hear some about that. We're going to have a discussion where we're going to ask some questions. We're going to open up questions to the audience. But for those who are watching this on our feed and may have an interest in reading either the executive summary or the full report, it's available at www.oversight.house.gov, and you don't need to hack anything to get that. Our speaker today, we are very pleased to have with us Congressman Jason Chaffetz, the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee since January 2015. He's serving his fourth term in the U.S. House from the state of Utah. He also serves on the House Judiciary Committee. Chairman Chaffetz has been a leader when it comes to government oversight and accountability. He's played a prominent role in numerous investigations, including the Benghazi terror attack, the Fast and Furious gun-running operation, the IRS targeting scandal, and the Secret Service investigation. He has been deeply involved in exposing waste, fraud, and abuse in government. And among the many stories that you'll hear about today, you won't be shocked to hear a little waste, fraud, and abuse going on in the midst of everything else. So with that introduction, let me turn the podium to Chairman Jason Chaffetz. Please welcome Chairman Chaffetz.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. Certainly the first day. This is a beautiful facility, and untold numbers of meetings will happen here, and I just love AEI, the work that they produce, the leadership that they demonstrated, the values and principles are something that I hold very dear to, and so it's an honor and privilege to be here and on the inauguration of this amazing facility. So thank you so much for having me. I am fortunate and blessed to be the chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Oversight and Government Reform was actually under a different name, was founded back in 1814. The whole idea was that every expenditure by the federal government would be overseen by the legislative branch as well. And this committee grew and expanded. At one point, it had, I think, 75 members on this committee. While it went through gyrations with different names and different sizes, back in the mid-1800s, there was a person who came out of Illinois who joined this committee. His name was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln decided that he didn't believe the president when the president was saying that the Mexican-American War had started on American territory, and he gave a series of speeches challenging that notion. That has served, I think, as an inspiration to us. And while the world has changed and now we're looking at cyber attacks and cybersecurity as opposed to where gunshots were fired on a particular day and time and starting a war, the breadth and scope of the federal government has become so large and so invasive and so wide. Our committee has been given the task to investigate anything at any time, which is almost unpalatable. It's so big and so massive. But this is one of the largest breaches in the history of the United States. Here we had some 22 plus million Americans whose information was gathered. Now, this report that we put out today is a culmination of a lot of work, some great work. Katie, Bailey, Mike Flynn, Julie Dunn, I cannot thank them enough for the 15 months that they poured into this, other resources within the committee, but particularly those three, in developing this nearly 250-page report. We think it's important that those millions of Americans understand how it happened. Now, the report does not attribute or attempt to attribute exactly who these nefarious actors were. We do believe it came from overseas, but we do believe that there are assets within the executive branch that need to figure out how to take care of this. They need to understand it, and not something that we put out there. But there are lessons learned. We are the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. So shame on us as a Congress and as a nation if we aren't self-critical in order to fix the problems. That's who we are as a nation. We're different than most nations. We are self-critical. And that's how you make things better. That's how you understand them. And I do hope this report gets the serious look that it's had. And I do appreciate the various agencies who've already come into our office to get a preview of what's going to come out in this report, because it is serious. And it will affect people pretty much from the mid-1980s who had ever even applied for a job in the federal government. You may not even have gotten the job in the federal government, and your information may have been breached along the way. So we have got to address this. And again, we're going to take some bold steps too and make some recommendations. One of the key ones here is what we call zero trust. Doesn't sound very nice, but zero trust is one of the things that I think the private sector figured out a long time ago, and the federal government, it's, I don't know, a decade or two behind. But zero trust, think of it like, remember when you were in grade school? I remember when I was back in third grade, and if I had to go somewhere outside of my classroom, I had to get a hall pass. And you get a hall pass from your teacher, you're walking down the hall, the principal, the vice principal, somebody may be there and say, hey, let me see your hall pass. All right, here it is. Yep, all right, we're going to verify who you are. And that hall pass would allow you to move from room to room or come back to where you want to go. The federal government, at least in its information systems, often operates without these hall passes in its crudest form. They will, once you get into the wall or on the other side of the wall, they just believe you. Oh yeah, everybody in here is cool. Everybody's good. That's not the way it should work, and it's not the way that it did work. And one of the most concerning things, I think, to come out of this report, and I'm going to read some of the text here and go through it in detail, but one of my biggest concerns is that back in 2005, the Inspector General started highlighting the problems at the Office of Personnel Management. You jump forward to 2007, and pretty much every year since then, they have said that the Office of Personnel Management has severe vulnerabilities. Let me give you some of the quotes from the Inspector General. I'll go to 2009. This year we are expanding the material weakness. Continuing weaknesses at OPM's information security program result directly from inadequate governance. 2010, the IG said, we continue to consider the IT security management structure insufficient. 2011, the IG said, we continue to believe the information security governance represents a material weakness. Go fast forward to 2012. There are, in fact, numerous information security incidents in fiscal 2012 that led to the loss of unauthorized release of mission-critical and sensitive data. They were telling us that it was there, it was happening, and continued into 2014. this is from their report of November of 2014, 11 major OPM information systems are operating without valid authorization. This represents a material weakness in the internal control structures at OPM's IT security program. They went on to say multi-factor authentication is not required to access OPM systems in accordance with the OMB memorandum. OPM continues to implement its continuous monitoring plan. However, security controls for all OPM systems are not adequately tested in accordance of their own policies. We have 72 inspectors general with 13,000 or so employees. Now they're going to have to become increasingly proficient in the IT world. But in this case, going back to 2005, they were waving the red flag saying, hey, we have the problem. We have some new leadership at the Office of Personnel Management, Beth Cobert, who is a serious player with a great background, and I appreciate the president appointing her. But his earlier appointment, with all due respect, was the wrong appointment. It was a political patronage job that the president took. He took I think he was policy director from his campaign and made her the head of the Office of Personnel Management. It looked to us from a critical eye as if it was just, hey, congratulations, thanks for your great work, let's go ahead and promote you. She also brought in, this is in April of 2015, Ms. Seymour, who was brought in to be the Chief Information Officer, actually said this: the adversaries in today's environment are typically used to more modern technologies. And so in this case, potentially, our antiquated technologies may have helped us a little bit. But I think it also comes down to culture and leadership. And one of the things we were able to do at OPM was recognize the problem. Recognize the problem. It took years for them to figure it out. Years for them to figure it out. And to suggest that COBOL was actually helping us because it was developed in the 1960s and everybody else had moved on, that they were lax in terms of dual authentication, lax in terms of other things that, such as the basic hygiene aspects you needed, was absolutely ridiculous. They did not heed the calls, and it created, we think, one of the biggest problems. In June of 2015, the Office of Personnel Management announced that the personnel records of 4.2 million Americans had been lost or stolen. And given the committee's jurisdiction over federal cybersecurity and information systems, we immediately held 2 hearings that same month to better understand what happened. And at our second hearing, the OPM revealed the theft was far more extensive than first announced. This was one of our fears and why we, in rapid succession, had another hearing. This time, the number of Americans impacted rose to more than 22.1 million, and as tens of millions of Americans had their background information data compromised. Even the fingerprint data was stolen for nearly 5.6 million Americans. And as many of you remember, following the second hearing, the director of OPM, Kathleen Archuleta, resigned, and just before the hearing we planned on February of 2015, the OPM's CIO, Donna Seymour, she also resigned. Our investigation uncovered significant concerns about the ability of OPM leadership to adequately manage the agency's outdated information technology. But I believe that the breach at OPM is a defining moment for federal cybersecurity. We have to recognize the problem and implement what we call a zero trust model as part of the cybersecurity strategy. You can't steal what you can't access, and the zero trust model makes life much harder on the hackers. And again, I express my faith and confidence in Beth Cobert. I was proud to support her nomination. Glad to see the Senate confirm her. She has a great background and is taking this very, very seriously. And I think the president, again, I will mention, I think made the right choice. Federal agencies, particularly the chief information officers, must recognize their positions on their front line in vital information. But the United States Postal Service, the State Department, the IRS, the White House, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and even the Pentagon have suffered each significant data breaches. I worry about the agencies that come to Congress and say, oh no, nothing here, nobody's ever gotten into our system. Oh yeah, really? You just haven't figured it out yet, because it probably has happened. As a government, they should be on notice. This is the new normal. It's been the normal for a while, but this should certainly be more than a wake-up call. What our investigation found troubling is how woefully insecure the OPM systems were given the vulnerability that it housed. OPM's legacy technology was not capable of supporting basic cybersecurity technologies such as encryption. That was a new phenomenon to them, encryption. I'm not kidding. Or network monitoring and logging. These were things that were not implemented. And again, this isn't that long ago, but something that probably should have been done more than a decade ago. But that's the way they operated. Let me step here and also pause for a second, give you a size and scope issue. The federal government spends roughly $80 billion a year on cyber, and it doesn't work. $80 billion. My state of Utah, we spend about $14 billion for everything we do in our state. From the National Guard to our teachers to our roads, you name it, we spend about $14 billion. This government spends $80 billion a year on technology, and it doesn't work. And it's certainly not secure. OPM had insufficient multi-factor authentication for employees and contractors logging onto OPM's network, despite it being a long-standing OMB requirement. To their credit, OMB had these standards in place, but even the Office of Personnel Management did not abide by them. OMB reported in 2014 that OPM had, quote, one of the weakest authentication profiles, end quote, in government, with only 1% of its users required to use personal identifiable verification, or PIV, cards to access their system. 1%. 11 of OPM systems did not have current authorities to operate. These included some of OPM's, a lot of acronyms there, Office of Personnel Management's most critical system, such as the system that serves as its hardware and software infrastructure environment and the background investigation system. These cyber shortcomings led the Inspector General to label OPM's information security governance as a significant deficiency. Despite the critical data OPM needed to secure, the agency spent roughly about $7 million annually on cybersecurity in fiscal years 2013, 2014, and 2015. It was among the lowest spent by reporting agencies back to the OMB. Now, in the whole scope of things, what you will find is you look at the $80 billion that is spent throughout the government, about 75% is spent on legacy systems. One of the things that we're working towards, it's a separate subject, but we're working towards, and maybe perhaps we can talk about this, is how does the government and certainly a number of these agencies make this quantum leap forward? Because they're going to have to leapfrog several generations of technology in order to get there, and we'll talk some more about that. The Office of Personnel Management leadership consistently made decisions demonstrating a failure to understand two important things. One, a failure to recognize the level of sophistication and seriousness of the attackers in accessing the nation's most sensitive data. And two, the absolute inadequate state of the IT setting there within the Office of Personnel Management. If the Office of Personnel Management had fully understand these things, different decisions would have been much earlier. That is clear within this report. But the agency still had the opportunity to stop the theft of vulnerable data. So let me kind of get a little bit more specific. According to the evidence obtained by the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team at DHS, OPM was under sustained attack for at least as far back as 2012 by an adversary focused on stealing OPM's most sensitive data. Yet OPM was unprepared for the disaster in 2015 as they would have been in 2012. So going back and looking at it, we knew there was a problem in 2012. Fast forward to 2015, they were still woefully underprepared to deal with it. We know now that by the beginning of 2014, 2 attackers had already penetrated OPM's network and were successful in establishing a presence on their network. In March of 2014, U.S. CERT notified OPM the first attacker was exfiltrating data from their networks. Due to OPM's failure to adequately log network activity, we will never know all the documents that were stolen by those hackers. As OPM began monitoring the first attacker, it was clear that the attacker was targeting background information data and taking documents related to those and other high-valued systems on the network. These documents included information on the user's background, information systems, a roadmap of sorts an attacker could use on the background investigation systems that our government was using. As the report makes clear, this is contrary to what OPM led us all to believe. Documents taken from OPM in 2014 gave the adversary an advantage in hacking the background investigation database and other sensitive systems. An OPM contractor working at the IT security operations and a key participant in OPM's incident response, reviewed by the committee, admitted these documents would give the attacker a future advantage. The decision to monitor the adversary in 2014 was made by OPM and its interagency partners to gain information about the attackers' techniques, procedures, and the decision in keeping with the best practices. Sometimes when you know there's an attack, you want to see what's going on and where this information is going to learn more. However, the failure was not to implementing the right technology to answer the two most fundamental questions in the investigating a data breach. One, how did they get in? And two, what did they take? OPM senior leadership failed to comprehend the extent in which their systems had been compromised. OPM didn't know the extent of the loss, but they also didn't know that there was a second attacker in their system. I thought there was one, but there was actually two, and they didn't figure that out. So while OPM is trying to press the reset button and to kick out the first attacker, the startling reality is the second likely related attacker was already roaming undetected in their systems. The signatures are similar, they're different. We do believe that there is a correlation between the two. This set of circumstances to a simple conclusion, the exfiltration of security clearance data was preventable. OPM leadership could have prevented or significantly mitigated the damage to the country eventually incurred if in March of 2014 it had, one, immediately secured the most valuable data, including possibly shutting down the systems. Pull the plug out, for goodness sake. That would have helped solve the problem. Deploy cutting-edge preventative cyber tools, and fully implementing an enforced-based security access controls like multi-factor authentication would have seriously limited the adversary's ability to move around the network, perhaps even delaying the adversary long enough to prevent the exfiltration of the data. Senior leadership from the agency head to the CIO could have made meaningful differences in the lives of millions of Americans. OPM's response was to invest in a whole new IT environment, and while that was probably long overdue, it failed to capture the immediate threat. And there were problems. To make the matters worse, at this time in 2014, OPM failed to obtain and deploy cutting-edge technology in a manner that would have allowed it to swiftly fix these holes. The attackers used the names Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, the alter egos of Iron Man and Captain America. They were kind of cute in how they did this stuff, but nevertheless, it should have been a clue to us. They also used other names from the Marvel universe, and you can find those. They were registering malicious domains. One of them they registered was opmsecurity.org and opmlearning.org. OPM is testing out new technologies. This is in part how they did what they did. Meanwhile, the attackers, Iron Man and Captain America, stayed at work stealing the background investigation data into the summer of 2014, the personnel records data in December 2014, and the fingerprint information in the spring of 2015. In June 2014, OPM begins testing the products of Cylance. OPM finally deploys Cylance preventative technologies 10 months later. 10 months. One of the other big challenges that we have within the federal government is the procurement process. And maybe many of you have probably tried to weave your way through the procurement process. It is not swift, it is not effective, it is not efficient, and in the world of cybersecurity, it sometimes will be generations after new technology has actually come and gone. Perhaps I'll tell you a little story about what some of the military is doing, because they're probably one of the worst in terms of their technology access problem. So, before that day, on April 15th, and I've given you a lot of dates, but I'm kind of trying to summarize a 250-page report. The day before, on April 15th, 2015, OPM notifies U.S. CERT about suspicious network traffic related to opmsecurity.org. From April 16th, 2015, through May of 2015, during the primary incident response period, security tools from Cylance immediately and consistently detects key malicious code and other threats to OPM. In fact, when Cylance's preventative security tool was put on OPM's network, OPM's enterprise during the initial incident response, so much malware was found on the tool that it's said to be lit up like a Christmas tree. And as of June 30th, 2015, 74 days after deploying Cylance's technology, almost 2,000 pieces of malware were blocked. Cylance and other security tools were always available to OPM, and the agency chose not to deploy key preventative technology until after the agency was severely compromised and until after the agency's most sensitive information was stolen. It's also important to highlight and clarify the role of a small veteran-owned company, Scitec. Now, Scitec, different than Cylance, but Scitec, there's a great deal of speculation in the media about the role of Scitec services and whether they or the OPM, quote-unquote, discovered the breach. Perhaps that wasn't the right question to be asked, because what is clear here is that their tool worked, and that perhaps the right question is what could have been done to prevent or mitigate the breach. Our report answers this question and provides the full Scitec story. Let me give you a quick synopsis, but I invite you to go look into there. What I will tell you is that while Scitec did not find the initial indicator of the compromise, they did find malware, and they did provide significant incident response and forensic support to OPM over a 2-week period, including forensic support that helped inform U.S. CERT's analysis of the breach. They were finding new breaches. Their technology was in a live environment implemented, and it did find this. Yet, despite the significant support, OPM had gone out of its way to deny Scitec had any significant role in providing services, and during its effort to control the press narrative internally, said we need to make sure that the press wasn't trying to resurrect, quote, the Scitec Dracula, end quote. They were more concerned about their press strategy than I think they were about protecting the data and the information. More importantly, Scitec has not been compensated for the incident response and forensic services provided, potentially in violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. You can't go use these tools in a live environment, implement them, make the representations to these organizations, and then not pay them a dime. And so we have given a referral that we'll give you more information about. It's in our press release, and we think it should be pursued. The data breach in 2014 should have sounded a high-level multi-agency national security alarm that a sophisticated, persistent actor seeking access was in the system. The alarm didn't sound until after the damage was done, and as the agency assessed the damage caused the hackers, OPM tried to downplay the outcome. Our investigative report also shows that OPM's former CIO, Donna Seymour, consistently failed to work with the Inspector General to better secure its systems, at times even misleading and thwarting the watchdog. OPM claimed the data breach discovered in 2014 and 2015 were not connected. Our investigation concluded the two attacks were likely connected and possibly coordinated. A full technical analysis can be found in the report, but it's apparent that the attackers focused on the same objective, had the same similar tactics and techniques and procedures that have been associated with the advanced persistent threat actors identified in public threat analysis. It's just another example of them misleading. And I hope every CIO will look at this and take it very seriously in this nearly 250-page report. Last little thought. For example, the report recommends federal agencies shift to adopt this zero trust model that I mentioned at the beginning. The current focus on perimeter-based security offers insufficient protection against the advanced persistent cyber threats targeting us today, because anyone inside the network is trusted. Zero trust centers on the concept that users inside the network are no more trustworthy than users outside the network, and access controls are critical in this model. Again, I wish Beth Cobert, the head of OPM, the best of luck. It's in all of our best interests. We want to be supportive. I think we're filling our mission and providing this oversight, and I hope these agencies get their act together, because there are huge vulnerabilities. Biggest vulnerability that I see out there right now, Department of Education. Perhaps we can talk about that. But if they don't get their act together and act together soon, you've seen that when we held our hearing and talked about the Department of Education and had their CIO up, and then he resigned because I think he understood that he was not doing his job and should never have been in that position in the first place. But there's more information at the Department of Education than there is at the Office of Personnel Management. And that is my biggest fear. I still sweat about what's happened at the Department of Education. Nevertheless, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
He's coming.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're joined by Claude Barfield, who's a resident scholar here at AEI and the co-author, my co-author in a report we released in July, which I'll give a little free publicity to, an American strategy for cyberspace.
Yeah, I saw it, yeah.
On the AEI website, if you're interested in that. And I'm going to let Claude have the first question.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, Mr. Chairman. I have to say, I tend to be a skeptic of congressional reports often. I once described the House Intelligence Report as not worth the paper it was written on. But I think I want to congratulate you. I looked at this all over the weekend, and this is really an in-depth study, the kind we too often don't get from the Congress. So I want to congratulate you on that.
Well, thanks.
My question really is to go back to something you referred to, or some things you referred to right at the end of your talk, and that is looking back over the last two years, actually, or even beyond, and with the work that you and your committee have done. For the audience, where do we stand across the board now? Is it likely that we will find in the next months, years, more headlines like the OPM? I mean, you've got dozens of agencies, and you mentioned the Department of Education, but you could just go on and on. Where do they stand after at least a year or so of the administration and some members of Congress pushing the departments and the agencies to do a better job?
One of the good things I think Congress did was implement what's called FITARA and the FITARA scorecard. So within Congress, there was no committee that had somebody specific to IT. Our committee, for the very first time, Troy Stock, who's our staff director, is here. We created an IT subcommittee, and the IT subcommittee is led by Will Hurd, great, wonderful person, CIA background, understands cloud computing, actually worked, I believe, at a cloud computing company before he's elected to Congress. And we're trying to look at not only emerging technologies, the acquisition process, but trying to hold these agencies accountable. And this scorecard is self-reporting, and we actually give it out to all the departments and agencies. The only one that won't respond to us is the White House, which scares me because I really do worry. I mean, they're obviously a target, but I worry that their tools are not as up to speed. Some agencies do quite well. The one that does consistently in the bottom 5, if you will, is NASA. Like, NASA can put a man on the moon, but they can't protect their email. It's unbelievable. So these are self-reporting scorecards. Most agencies are in the D-F category. Troy, if I can ask you, who's doing the best on the FITARA scorecard? Do you recall who was like at the top of the I'm told it's Commerce and GSA. Pretty random, but I'm glad Commerce is doing it. One of the big projects that we have is the census. And they're trying to deploy new technology. It's one of the things we're going to be keenly looking at going into 2020. But the biggest threat, the immediate threat that I personally see is the Department of Education. They have 180 plus databases. They do not even have the most basic of tools. They have more than help me here if I get the number wrong. I think it's 130 million Social Security numbers in their system. So that makes this OPM thing look pretty small. If Junior decides he wants to go to college and he's got to fill out an application to get a loan, and by the way, they service more than $1 trillion in loans. Trillion. You have tens of millions of Americans that have their loans for student loans. When Junior fills out that college application and he wants to get that Pell Grant and he wants to get these other loans, guess what? He's putting mom's information in there. He's putting dad's information. He's putting his brother's information. He's putting dad's uncle's information, credit union information, banking information. All of that is in one file. And it's housed at the Department of Education. And they do not have dual authentication. They do not have encryption. They do not have... I think it's already happened. I have no proof of it, but it is. I have been warning this bell for a long time. When we had the CIO up, he resigned. It scares me. It just scares the living daylights out of me. So.
Well, let me pick up on Claude's question and kind of ask, reading the report, Keystone Cops may not be fair, but there's certainly a sense of a mismatch between the attackers and the victim and OPM, the folks at OPM. And I guess the question I'd like to tee up is, do you see a world in which agencies like OPM or Department of Education kind of operating on their own can get themselves in a position where they can defend themselves against attacks from sophisticated attackers? So assuming that we have a state actor here, or a state-sponsored actor, so it's not your typical proverbial high school kid, with some malware, but a sophisticated actor downloading, in this case, exfiltrating really national security sensitive information. Is it fair to put an agency like OPM up against a state that that kind of sophisticated attacker in the sense, or realistic that we can think that we can raise agencies like that up to that level of proficiency?
I think we have no choice. One of my concerns at the Department of Education, you have more than 90,000 people that are authorized to go into the system. So tell me all 90,000 of them have a clean bill of health. That's just not realistic, because all the different schools and everything, they all have access into there. So you have to really leapfrog. Now, one of the things that's in motion, it has not been introduced. Will Hurd, in conjunction with Steny Hoyer, who's really taken a good leadership role in this, along with another a really good hire that the president put in place, is Tony Scott. Tony Scott is the CIO, supposed to be the CIO for the federal government, has some real-world background experience, and we're working on this fund, if you will, so that an agency can make a business case to come in and leapfrog ahead. And we're going to probably have to allocate a few $1 billion so that they can leapfrog ahead and come into the 21st century. That's still a work in motion. I haven't introduced it yet. We're working on a good bipartisan bill, an authorization bill that can allow an agency to say, all right, here's our game plan, here's what we're going to do. Because the stats on what we're using, I can't remember the number, Katie probably does. The number, we have something like, how many lines of code that we have COBOL on? I mean, we have literally thousands of federal employees that work on COBOL. We're taking people and we're dumbing them down in order to actually work on. Do you remember the? Yeah. So Social Security Administration is also one that we've got keen concerns about, but we have to take this quantum leap. We have no choice.
Before moving on, is it impractical to move toward or think about giving some central person or authority, whether, I'm not sure where it would be, a whip hand here? I mean, what's happening now is you're trying to entice them with money, but who then, is there any, maybe it makes no sense, there are too many agencies, but to at least take maybe a target of the most vulnerable or the most important agencies and say, okay, this is what you have to do within the next month or year or whatever. Maybe that's not practical.
There are certain agencies that
I'm talking about the central force.
They're on their own grid and their own thing, and I don't have to worry about them. It's the run-of-the-mill average agency that I do have these deep concerns. My point back to some who say, well, we need more money. Really? I mean, I was elected I swore into office in 2009 with Barack Obama. The Obama administration has spent more than $600 billion on IT, and this is where we're at. So don't tell me that we're $3 billion away from solving this. What makes you think that 3 more was the difference between good cybersecurity and bad cybersecurity? We have a huge problem with personnel. And I do buy the idea that it's very difficult in this environment to hire and retain IT personnel. Every private sector company needs good IT people. We got to find the right balance between private sector and public. But you know, at the Department of Education, I think they have 180 some odd databases. it's just unbelievable. And the concept of cloud computing. The United States military mostly does things right, but I got to tell you, there was a system that I saw. They were so excited because they just got Windows 2003. Like they just got it within the last 6 months. They don't even support this stuff. Part of what, and I don't want to get into this too much, but part of what was happening with the Secretary of State is she was acquiring technology that wasn't even supported by BlackBerry. You couldn't buy it. She was actually buying this stuff off of eBay because somebody was selling their old machine. That's what she liked, so she did it. It creates this huge vulnerability. So, and it's unnecessary.
Well, so that kind of comes to two sets of questions. One is agency accountability, and the other is personal accountability. And you have some recommendations in the report about when agencies are persistently operating without authorities to operate, the ATOs, that you're supposed to have under OMB Circular 130. At the end of the day, the agency can continue doing that until you come along. So is there some other sanction? Is there some other means of accountability? Should OMB under FSMA, for example, be given additional authority to police agency compliance?
I would heap praise on Tony Scott because I do think he is a serious individual with his background at Microsoft, background at Disney. I think he understands the size and the scope. There's no just turning this ship around and, the next, couple months and then he will have this all solved. But that's why we, at least at the Oversight Committee, poured a lot of resources and time and effort to draw attention to this. In part, you got to shame them into doing it. But we also got to give them the tools to make that quantum leap. And if you all got suggestions, we're all ears. But I do think this bill that Will Hurd and Steny Hoyer are working on will be helpful in moving that ball forward. But there's no short, sweet answer here other than, come on, pay attention, folks. Don't give me this. At the Department of Labor, they can't even get the support. I think it's Department of Labor, isn't it? They can't even, they're having to go online to buy hardware and even some software that's literally like used things. They can't buy it from the manufacturer, so.
Claude, did you have more questions?
I have one final question before we turn to the audience, and that is, and I'd like to pull away from the report itself. You've got a lot of experience here, and there's look at the context in which this report is coming out, and what has happened in the United States over the last couple of years, and what has happened quite recently in terms of attacks. The Sony, then OPM,
right.
Now DNC, and then in a story that has not been reported very much, this hack of the NSA is really not only startling but alarming. We still do not have, and the world doesn't know, and I'm not criticizing the administration because I think every administration will be feeling its way here. What is the proper response to these attacks? We don't have any kind of way of letting the rest of the world, our adversaries and our friends know, okay, if you do this, we will do that. The OPM, as I know you probably had him before the committee, Clapper said this is just an intelligence operation. I tip my hat to the Chinese or whoever did this. We have not decided what we're going to do about the DNC, even though the administration keeps talking about how disturbing it is that the Russians it looks as if they're trying to interfere with our elections. Is it time for the United States to go beyond what it is said, to give some sense of what we think are the priority in terms of responses to these attacks? How does Sony differ from the OPM as far as the president is concerned and the Congress is concerned?
I think you've touched on one of the hardest questions that has yet to be answered. I think AEI and the other organizations are really going to have to dive deep into this, and I would love your thoughts and perspective. I believe there is a cyber war, and I believe it's happening right now. It's been happening for some time. We're being naive at best if you think it's not happening. I mean, every day our financial institutions, our companies, big, small, even the community banks and local credit unions are dealing with a bombardment of nation states all the way down to a guy in a van down by the river. It's happening continuously. So how do you fire back? If somebody were to fire missiles at us, we fire a missile back. So if we know a hack is coming from a particular location and we can pinpoint it, what do you do about it? What do you do about it if it's coming out of Russia? I don't know. We got to prosecute this, but I think the administration's sending all the wrong signals. And not to get too political, but when you take all this classified information at the State Department and you take 4 years of federal records and you put them in a non-secure location, you give 10 people or so access to all this information who don't have the proper security clearance, what do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen? People's lives are in danger. We're not messing around. You know, we talk about financial information, Social Security numbers, but when you're talking about really highly classified information, people who serve this nation put their lives on the line, and then that information is just out in the open, I mean, the nefarious actors are going to go grab this and they're going to act on it. And it's unnecessary. There are good tools that are out there that are less expensive that will actually thwart these attacks, but it's a constant cyber attack. And I don't know the answer of what is the right punishment. But I don't think it is, well, there was no intent. You know, we didn't mean bad. Okay, go tell the 22 million people who now have had their identity stolen, their fingerprint data information taken. I mean, what do these people do? It's an inadequate response and something our government and the nation needs to have a discussion about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you the very short answer, and then
sure.
There's a longer report that goes with that. But I think just in a word, I think where we've ended up coming out is that we need to be much more proactive and much more preemptive. That to wait for the attack to occur and then say, well, we're going to punish you after the fact, it's too late. The horse is out of the barn. So to have the capacity to identify attacks, particularly coming from nation states and state-sponsored actors, and to stop them in process, which is capacity that we have and don't deploy very often, is at the end of the day where we come up. But let me stop and turn to the audience. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, and we've got someone right here in the front row. Do we have microphones? So if you wait for a microphone, there's one right up here, please, right up front. And if you'd state your name and affiliation and ask a concise question, please.
Hello, I'm Sharon Bovat, Voice of a Moderate. I did get to talk to the State Department technology person for the internet, and he was complaining to me about Microsoft 2003, exactly what you're saying, and how
right.
It wasn't being serviced. And then we went into detail, and then I was at George Mason, and we found out that a lot of the people, it's almost a 10-year problem in the government positions, they were in charge of anthrax. They had to figure out how to deal with that issue. They had to deal with how do we make the building green. Every mandate that comes in,
right.
These are the go-to guys and the go-to consultants. And they're saying there needs to be some type of accreditation that you actually know about IT before you get to be in charge of IT for an agency, for a section of an agency. And I think that's the first thing that the government can do is just mandate that the people doing IT work know about IT.
Yeah.
And they're just not a person that's the go-to guy for
No, thank you. And I think you're exactly right. You know, what she's saying about, gosh, let's hire some IT people that actually know about IT and go through some degree of certification. What I see a lot of happening is we take people who are good, they're educated, they're excited, they're getting jobs. There are a lot of younger people who want to get, and then we're dumbing them down to 1960s technology. And we're trying to recode and play defense. We have literally thousands of people that would be better deployed with newer technologies. And the acquisition process, Mac Thornberry, the chairman of Armed Services, this is one of his major initiatives, is to figure out how we do not only the acquisition of major weapon systems, but also look at the cyber portfolio, because we're slow to get to the next generation of things. And it's a problem. It's a real problem. You know, they said, oh, let's make all this security, all this information secure. While at the same time, the FBI is complaining about iPhones. Well, put everybody on an iPhone. Maybe that would solve it. You know, that'd be a lot easier. It just does seem like one good trip to Best Buy would solve a lot of these problems. So,
next question is right here in the middle.
Hi, Joshua Mize, Morris, Manning, and Martin. Mr. Chairman, do you see any prospect for a long-term basic structural reform? I mean, when you talk about all these different agencies doing IT, the Department of Education, to the extent it has any core competency, that core competency is never going to be IT. And the way these private companies do it is divisions of Google or Microsoft don't have their own IT divisions. You know, there's one group within Google that runs the data centers, and then the different divisions of Google act essentially as customers, and they go to the data center division for resources and to design them databases. I mean, is there any prospect for 6-7 years from now for, U.S. IT to be run by, NSA or CIA, and the Department of Education go as a customer and say, here's what we need, and here's can you design this cloud for us?
I don't see it moving as far as you suggest, that the federal government has one central repository or base of experience. There are some experiments that are going on. There's a group out of California that has been tasked and funded to develop some of these interesting technologies that could be deployed. What I'd like to see, for instance, at the Department of Education, where you have 180 plus databases, and then when you ask this then CIO, well, how many are you responsible for? He'd say, oh, 2. I mean, literally, he's like, 2. And so then you say, well, what about the other 170 plus of them? And he says, well, those are contractors. We just hire contractors. But he's not checking up on them. They wouldn't even allow the Inspector General to go do audits and forensic testing of this. And they're servicing $1 trillion in loans. So this is we're talking about the basics. We're not even talking about sophistication at this point. Just do some basic things right. And it really, the way these nefarious actors got into the system was the Department of Interior. Okay, so, not high in the priority list probably. We're worried about Fish and Wildlife or the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They probably didn't get the same attention, but it also allowed Captain America to get into the system. So I hear what you're saying. The FITARA scorecard, I think, will do real well this in helping highlight this, but there is not a master plan that says, let's go to one repository. One of the things our subcommittee is going to look at are emerging technologies. And how do we deal with that? So the government wants to build all these databases. I don't trust the federal government. I don't trust them. What happens when they move to facial recognition and they get all these cameras out there and they start building the database of facial recognition? Who's going to protect that? Who's going to secure that? I could spend hours talking about just that. So, let alone, how do we deal with driverless cars? When somebody hacks into your car, who do you call? Who has jurisdiction? Is it the National Transportation Safety Board? Is it your local Sandy City Police in Utah? Is it the FBI? I mean, come on. Technology is great as long as it works and as long as it's secure. But they have not figured this. They have not figured this out. It's a very difficult equation. And the brain power that's in here in other rooms is really going to. We're going to have a lot of moral discussions with this country about the role of technology, how invasive it's going to become in our society. What is the proper role of government? What about drones? What about airspace? Who controls the airspace? FAA says it's all ours. I said at 500 feet? Yeah, that's ours. What about 200 feet? Yeah, that's ours. What about 1 inch off the ground? Oh, yeah, that's ours. What do you mean it's yours? Okay, so a drone comes in my backyard and I want to shoot it with my shotgun. Can I do that? Oh, no, you can't do that. It's my private property. There are so many discussions that need to be had. How do you fire back? What is private property? What is a reasonable expectation of privacy? How far should our federal government go? We have a new report that's coming out, just to kind of tease it a little bit, about stingrays, simulated cell phone towers. You'd be shocked at what your federal government is doing to gather your personal information. You won't even believe it. And they can't keep it secure. That's the point, right? I don't trust them. They're not doing the basics, and they want to collect more data. So, sorry, I got a little teed off on that.
That big building in Utah makes you nervous?
No, not so much. Utah's safe.
That was one of the reactions to the recent NSA leak. Somebody said, we can't expect the NSA to keep...
We want to have the best intelligence overseas. But in the United States of America, on suspicionless Americans, stay out of my business. You do not need to keep collecting information on suspicionless Americans. That's not the role of the federal government.
In the back.
We've got one more question in the back, and that may wrap it up for us.
Brendan Bordelon with Morning Consult. Mr. Chairman, to kind of go to the context question again, there's reports out this week about repeated Russian breaches into election databases now starting to look like a concerted effort to influence the U.S. election. I don't know if you can speak to the state level security systems, but on the federal level, are you confident that federal actors, agencies are doing what they can to protect election infrastructure? And then sort of a corollary to that, DHS Secretary Jay Johnson, he's recommended designating election infrastructure critical infrastructure, putting it on par with the electric grid, with the financial systems. Is that something that you think should be done? And do you think the federal government has the bandwidth to sort of go in at the state level and I assume at some level take over some of these security systems?
Well, as you know, those responsible for the integrity of the election system really come down to the counties. And I think while everybody says, oh, let's go to technology, there's nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned paper ballot. You have a lot of states that are moving to vote by mail. What I think states should be worried and concerned about are electronic voting machines and moving towards all electronic voting. There's some people that advocate, hey, let's do it on the internet. I don't go there. There's a lot that technology and the internet offers. I don't think voting is necessarily one of them. And I don't think we have the bandwidth or the internal expertise to deal with a county-by-county situation. Auditing might be a good way to do this, but whether or not it's in the news, this is the point of zero trust. You should always assume that somebody's trying to penetrate your system and that they're nefarious in their intent. And it doesn't have to be just Russia. We're naive. If you think it's just Russia, wake up, America. It's not. It is people with their own goals and their own ability that think they can anonymously come in and try to hack something. So, of course it's going to happen. It probably happened in the last election. Okay? But I worry about those that we don't know about. And there's a warning sign there, but these really go down to the counties and the integrity at the county level. They all operate. In Utah, it's the whole spectrum. They do things so differently in each county, and they have their own autonomy. But I don't think there's anything wrong with good old-fashioned paper ballots. I really don't.
We're going to let that be the last word. Chairman Chaffetz,
Oh,
thank
thanks
you
for having me.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the hard work of government. We all appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
You brought up a great